I'd like at this point to give a formal welcome to our speaker, Sue Brayne. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to our meeting tonight, Sue. Sue is an end-of-life researcher. She's an author. She's an astrological journalist. She has an MA in Rhetoric and Rituals of Death. She has a second MA in creative writing. And she's a TEDx speaker, spreading her ideas on how to wear your mortality with pride. Sue launched her absolutely fantastic YouTube channel. I've had such fun exploring that. I fully recommend it. Celebrating Astrology. She launched that in July 2024, where she hosts a wide range of astrologers and other speakers. Her interviews with leading astrologers appear regularly in the Astrological Journal, and her articles have been published by Astrodienst, or astro.com as we sometimes refer to it. So Sue is going to speak on a matter of deep importance to all living beings, something we all share but perhaps don't focus on until life events bring the matter more up in our consciousness. And a really warm welcome to you, Sue, this evening. Thank you. You've come to speak to us on the subject of astrology and mortality. Over to you.
Hey, thank you. I'm just going to do a brief introduction, and then I'm going to share the screen. So just bear with me for I just introduce what's going on here for me. So first and foremost, the talk tonight is not about how to forecast someone's death, although I will be touching on that a little bit later on. Rather, it's about how I believe how astrology can put us back in right relationship with our mortality, so we can make the very best of the life that we're here to experience. Now, I want to begin by giving you a little bit of background about why I want to give this talk on astrology and mortality. Before I became a full-time astrologer, I spent 30 years helping people to talk more honestly and openly about death and dying. And this is kind of prompted by surviving a light aircraft crash. And I was around about the age of 37, and it just sort of pushed my mortality right in my face. And as I was sitting beside the wreckage of the plane, I suddenly saw that the life I was living was utterly vacuous. That's the only word I can describe it as. And if I didn't do something about it, it would have been better that I'd died in the crash. So I did do something about it. Initially, I trained as a life, death and transition facilitator with the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross organization. Now, Elizabeth was one of the first doctors to really listen to the spiritual needs of the dying. And I was so struck by her saying, if you can't live, you can't die. And if you can't die, you can't live. And that's been my motto now for my own relationship with mortality. So after I completed my MA in the Rhetoric and Rituals of Death, which was one of the best years of my life, I became an honorary end-of-life researcher into one of the first studies into the transpersonal or spiritual experiences of the dying. And I came absolutely convinced that some form of consciousness continues after physical death, and that love, with capital L love, becomes present as the person's life draws to a close. Now, we need to leave this here because otherwise tonight's going to get hijacked talking about end-of-life experiences. So that's not what's going to happen tonight. So I went on to train as a psychotherapist, specializing in trauma, grief, and death and dying. And then I wrote the D word, talking about dying, and then another book called Living Fully, Dying Consciously. And then I joined the Death Cafe movement and facilitated well over 100 death cafes, which provide a space for people to talk about death and dying in any way they want to. And it really struck me that participants were always so grateful to have the opportunity to talk about what really mattered without the fear of people saying they were morbid or sort of closing them down because they didn't like the subject, basically. And people who came felt the Death Cafe kind of put them in touch with this precious mystery of their own mortality, and also the mortality of those they loved. And this prompted the subject for my TEDx talk, which is called Wear Your Mortality with Pride. So, as you may glean, I've been immersed in exploring our relationship with mortality, which is why I'm so delighted to bring this together with the Institute for Astrology. And speaking as an old-fashioned Aquarian, I find it wonderfully synchronistic that I should be giving this talk as Pluto, the ruler of my 12th house, settles into Aquarius, which is in my 3rd house. And Saturn, the ruler of my sun sign, is traveling towards Neptune and the North Node in Pisces. And I see Saturn in Pisces as manifesting the spiritual in all kinds of mysterious ways. And perhaps it's using this mysterious way tonight. I also want to say that astrology and mortality are huge subjects in themselves. And bringing the two together means we're looking at a vast kind of mind-blowing field of study. So tonight we can only really scratch the very thinnest of surfaces, but I'm hoping that this will stimulate thought, and I hope we'll have enough time at the end for lots of Q&As. So I'm now going to share my screen, so just bear with me for a sec. Okay, I'm just going to go play from stop. Here we go. So can everybody see that? Thumbs up. Cool. Okie doke. So I want to set out why, before we talk about astrology, I want to set out why I believe we struggle so much in our Western culture with the fear of mortality and the consequence this has on us. I think this is really important. So tonight's talk, I am proposing that Western culture has lost its way home. The fallout of this makes us gives us a one-dimensional view of life, and that makes us terrified of loss and grief. Yet, according to ancient traditions, we're part of an intelligent universe. Back there, hang on a sec, I don't know what it's done that for. Just bear with me a sec. I think, unfortunately, this is on a timer. Hold on. So, yes, I'm just going to go back. So we're part of an intelligent universe with the innate existential desire to connect with something greater. And I believe astrology reconnects us with this something greater and puts us back in right relationship with life and death. So it was beautifully synchronistic that when I was beginning to prepare for this talk, I received a round robin email from Stephen Jenkinson. Now, he's the founder of Orphan Wisdom, and he's been working extensively with the dying and travels around the world talking about this. And in fact, he's been recently diagnosed with a terminal illness and is willingly sharing how he's embracing this stage of his life. Now, his quote for me sums up our fear of mortality. He says, "We are, no matter our passports or our beliefs in the matter, the grandchild of a forlorn culture of orphans who've overstayed, so forgot to go home. And now we're not sure where home is." Now, what I believe he's referring to is how Western culture regards death as a medical failure. And this denial of the most natural end to our mortalities means we've lost sight of the blessed release of death. Moreover, it's frightening not to know where home is. To feel safe and to thrive in life, we need a strong sense of safety and belonging. In fact, a safe and a healthy relationship with our mortality creates the foundation for us to go forth into the world and do what we need to do. So, do you know, we haven't always been like this. I'm going to have to go back here. We haven't always been steeped in this denial of death. A brooch like this Anglo-Saxon one was traditionally worn by tribal leaders as a reminder of their mortality, that they were just passing through this worldly existence like everyone else and would return to where they came from. And it is said that the warriors returning triumphant to Rome after battle, I hope this is true, had someone accompanying them in their chariot, whispering into their ear, "Remember you're mortal, remember you're mortal." So in short, our mortality reminds us to be humble, to understand that life is an experience, and it's what we make of that experience that matters, that our physical home, which is the body, that's our home while we're here in physical form, is transient. It will die. And our real home is the source, the light, the cosmos, God. Call it what you will. So what's happened to our relationship with mortality? Well, over the past 2,500 years or so, as a lot's happened in our culture, in our Western culture, to restrict our existential understanding of mortality. I know the church has had a huge influence on this, which we can't go into tonight, but another major influence was the Age of Enlightenment. So I think we've all heard of René Descartes. He's a philosopher, scientist, and mathematician, expounding, "I think, therefore I am," and how this influenced the way science and reason prevailed thereafter, with the result that existential influences, things that cannot be explained, were dismissed. If you can't see it, you can't prove it, so it doesn't exist. Now, this reductionist approach meant that although astronomy continued to be regarded as a science, it could be mathematically proved, astrology, which is in essence the study of the energetic impact that the planets and stars have on human experience, couldn't be proved. And so it was pushed into the shadows. And I think the cosmos was also kind of diminished into the view that it kind of consists of a bunch of rocks randomly floating around in space without much rhyme or reason. Yet, when we lose connection with the existential, that magical unseen worlds, our relationship with mortality, I believe, becomes warped, because we start wanting to capture life. We want to define it. We want to make sense of it. So we start forming contractual relationships with whatever we conceive God to be. So if you do this for me, I'll do that for you. And we develop this sort of expectation that love should or ought to be solid and dependable. And in other words, we expect certainty. One of these expectations is the young don't die first. But we forget that physical life is transient for everyone, no matter their age. And for me, the most significant is that we lose connection with Kairos time. And we focus instead on Chronos, linear time, where we become enslaved by the ticking of the clock. Time is always running out, and we end up rushing about in pursuit of what? So what happens when we disconnect from Kairos time? Well, we lose the magic of the moment of now. Kairos time is about learning to align with the right time to take action, taking a breath and considering the consequences of our action and what needs to be attended to for the best outcome, not just for now, but for our future and the future of the next generation. Put that back again. So, yeah, I love how some American Indian cultures embrace the concept that any decisions taken by the tribe take into consideration 7 generations in the past and 7 generations in the future. Now that is, for me, Kairos time. So what happens when we lose the magic of the moment of now? Well, I believe we forget to look up anymore. We end up looking down rather than up. We lose connection with the awe and wonder, our relationship with God, whatever we perceive that to be, of being part of a beautiful, sentient, mysterious universe. We lose faith in being part of something far greater than ourselves. And this means we're no longer engaged with the living universe or our environment. I mean, planet Earth provides us with a physical home while we're experiencing our mortality. But look what we're doing to her. So we dismiss, and we also dismiss Hermetic arts such as astrology, numerology, and tarot as rubbish, when in fact they provide magical guidance to who we are and how we can learn to meet ourselves. And I think this has serious consequences because it creates this sort of one-dimensional view of life, which is kind of filled with fear and doubt. And I think this makes us terrified of loss and grief. So, thing is that grief, suffering, depression, despair, whatever our suffering is, it's part of the human condition. And every person in the world will experience it in some form. But without faith and wonder, and sorry about this, keeping it on going to and fro, without wonder and awe, our suffering is a really heavy cloak to wear because it becomes us rather than it being an experience that we grow through. So I do think, thankfully, things are beginning to change a bit. I don't know if everybody's seen this, but it is an extraordinary video from the James Webb Telescope, which was launched in December 2021, explaining how the universe potentially is a living entity. But note the header. It says something really terrifying beyond. Now, why should the thought of being part of a living universe be terrifying? I don't understand that. And is it really such an extraordinary discovery when indigenous teachings from ancient times know the universe was conscious? Plato in his Timerius spoke of the world as a living being. The Neoplatonists believed in the world soul concept, that we were all connected. Much later on, obviously, James Lovelock, gosh, he experienced such ridicule from the scientific community when he introduced the Gaia principle, saying planet Earth was a self-regulating system. And then Rupert Sheldrake's also really rubbed up against the scientific community when he talks about the morphic field or panpsychism, which reintroduces the concept that the mind is a fundamental feature of the world which exists throughout the universe. In other words, everything in the universe is conscious. Now, if you want to hear more about panpsychism, really recommend in Our Times, Melvin Bragg hosted a really interesting talk in Our Times on panpsychism, where a scientist who does not believe in a living universe, I just couldn't believe what he was saying anyway, talks to two clinical psychologists who do. Very interesting conversation. So for me, while scientists and clinical psychologists continue to tie themselves in knots over whether the universe is living or not, theologians and all the great thinkers of our time throughout time have been contemplating our mortality and our relationship with the divine. Now, I don't know if anyone of you have heard about Beverly Lanzetta. She's an American theologian in contemplative wisdom, and I love how she talks about the way the deep self seeks something more radical, intense from life and longs to be united with its source, our true home, which takes us back to Stephen Jenkins' quote. So Yes, there are so many compelling stories from people speaking about extraordinary experiences through near-death experiences and mystical experiences, where they encounter an all-encompassing love that they've never found in their earthly existence. And many say afterwards that they're no longer fearful of death and are looking forward to kind of returning to their true home. And this certainly happened to me when after I had a mystical experience where I met the unconditional love of the universe. And I know this is where I'm returning to. And again, we've got to leave that here, but I'm happy to talk about it more in the Q&As after. Now, the Welsh have this beautiful word called hirieth to describe the deep longing for home. And I use the word hirieth to express this sense of kind of melancholic missing or yearning or knowing there is more to home and belonging than what we create in this physical life. And I'd just be interested in how many of us here tonight identify with this. So, yes, we can't really talk about mortality and astrology without the input of Carl Jung, who, as we all know, was an astrologer and obviously was the father of modern psychology. And Jung said it was desirable to think of death only as a transition, as a part of life's process whose extent and duration are beyond our knowledge. And death is a kind of sinking back. I love what he says, a kind of sinking back into the dark of the unconscious from where we've come from. And he also said that we should become aware of the fact that soon after the middle of our life, and this is, the midlife, the astrological midlife crisis, Uranus opposition, Neptune square, Saturn opposition, the soul begins its secret work, getting ready for the departure. And I love that. I think our relationship with mortality would change for the better if we started to acknowledge that the second half of our life is a preparation for our physical death. And when I read the recent Stanford University study, I'm sure many of you will have read it, suggesting there are two bursts in the aging process, one around 40, guess what, and another around 60, oh, guess what, that's around about the second Saturn return. It made me laugh because scientists don't get that astrological cycles are constantly reminding us of the different stages of our mortality, but more about that in a bit. So here we have, I want to conclude this part of the talk with Thomas More. I'm sure many of you know his wonderful work. He's also an astrologer, psychotherapist, author of lots of books, but one of the beautiful books is Care for the Soul. And he has a slightly different take on all of this when he talks about our experience of mortality and our relationship with home. He says that our spirit, the spiritus, the breath of life, is that part of us which wants to ascend, which wants to return to where we've come from. Just going to go back there in a sec. But on the other hand, and he makes a very strong distinction between the soul and the spirit. On the other hand, the soul loves being attached to life. It needs a sense of physical home. It wants to have physical experiences in a physical body. So I kind of, when I read that, it sort of made me, hang on, there we go. It made me sort of really think that, especially as I've grown older, that why I feel I'm kind of constantly walking a tightrope between kind of this desire to ascend, to go home, and this desire to continue to experience the human condition in this physical form. I'm very attached to being here as well. So I just wondered if any of you have ever experienced this as well. And I was doing giving a talk to quite a young group of women, and they couldn't relate to this at all because they were young and had young children, and they weren't ready to think about this sort of sense of ascending and going home. They were very attached to being here, obviously. So I'm just chucking this in the mix with you. So yes, okay. Let's go to have a look at how astrology can put us back, I believe can put us back in right relationship with our mortality. And in doing so, hopefully ease the fear of death, which for me is ultimately the fear of the unknown, or as we've been exploring, the disconnection from home. And again, this is a vast subject, so we can only touch on the very basics. So tonight, I'm proposing to touch on the role of the psychopomp, some of the houses, the nodal axis, the transpersonal planets, and the planetary cycles. And I want to conclude with Felicity Warner's research into how the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water, help us during our dying process. I'm going to come back to her, but she's the founder of, this is quite annoying, isn't it? She's the founder of the School of Soul Midwifery and has trained hundreds of spiritual midwives to be present at dying. So let's begin with the psychopomps. And obviously, psychopomp literally means the guide of the souls. Now, these can be symbolized in all manner of creatures, spirits, angels, deities, or shamans that every culture since ancient times have incorporated into the mythology to explain the great transition between life and death. And essentially, a psychopomp guides the dying soul beyond the veil into the afterlife. And I believe we've always needed to make these mythological narratives to make sense of something we don't have answers for, or as I like to call it, great mystery. So here are a few examples of psychopomps. I'm not going to go into them, but in our Western culture, our Western astrological culture, Mercury, the winged messenger, is the psychopomp who is said to conduct the souls of the dead to the river Styx and hand them to Charon, the oarsman. Now, as Charon, not to be confused with Chiron, the wounded healer, rows the dead souls across the great river, their minds are wiped clean of any memories of life before they enter the afterlife. Now, I love the mythology of Mercury because, apart from all kinds of nefarious things he can get up to, he's the only god who's able to visit the gods and the underworld. And of course, he acted as go-between for Zeus and Pluto when Demeter cast the earth into barrenness after naughty Pluto, abducted her beloved daughter Persephone. And I know Alison, I've seen her here tonight. She gave a fascinating talk for you about how Mercury might act as a psychopomp when looking at the charts of people who've died. And I think that's the beginning of a really interesting study. But coming back to this talk, I don't know about you, but I absolutely love the idea of Mercury traveling alongside me as I make my transition to the other side. For me, it turns death into an adventure with a being who knows exactly what to do and where to go. So let's move on to the nodal axis. This is another huge complex area. So again, just scratching the surface. So for me, the nodal axis gives life context and meaning to how astrology can put us back in right relationship with the purpose of our mortality. As Mark Twain said, I just love this quote, the 2 most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. So I interviewed Stephen Forrest about the nodal journey. Now he's an evolutionary astrologer, and he said that the South Node is regarded as our entry and release point, carrying karmic patterns from a past life to be resolved. In this life, it indicates our fears, addictions, compulsions, or patterns of behavior that we need to grow beyond. And it's like wearing a kind of familiar old jumper, which is full of holes and well past its sell-by date. And I want to say here that I'm not presenting past lives as absolute truths. This is very much an evolutionary astrologer's perspective, and it is actually one I'm really interested in. Now, Stephen went on to say that the North Node, that's our path of spiritual or soul evolution, is where we're unconsciously called to and where we're met with trials and tests along the way. To evolve, we must face the fear of leaving the familiar behind, and we need to encounter hardships to grow and mature. Otherwise, what's the point of life? Now, I asked Stephen if we unconsciously know when we haven't travelled to our path of evolution, and he believes that we do. And this might affect our aging and dying process, which that kind of makes sense to me. I suppose it's the difference between, a life that's been really tried and tested and rubbed up against really difficult things and kind of well lived, opposed to a life full of regrets. I wish I had, if only. And as George Bernard Shaw says, this is another one of my I love this quote, I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. Life is no brief candle for me. Yes, I live and die by that one too. So the North Node, I think, is very interesting. Reading Judith Hill, she's the principal of the Academy of Astrological Medicine. She presents a very interesting case for predicting death through challenging aspects to the South Node. She says that the South Node is reliably prominent at the time of most deaths, and she cites the strongest indication being the transiting nodes conjuncting the natal sun or moon. Squares play their part, but are less strong than the conjunction. And if you want to learn more about this, I recommend her book, which is The Lunar Nodes, Your Key to Excellent Chart Interpretation. It's a very interesting take on all of this. And I've also kind of read a lot of things about when Saturn squares or opposes the natal sun, especially in an older person's chart. It might suggest the tipping point of our life, a kind of indicating, get ready, your experience of mortality is beginning to run out. And Saturn might also indicate the dying process when squaring or opposite natal planets in the 4th, the 8th, and the 6th house of health. But we'll come back to those houses in a minute. I've also, so I just want to mention here, Bernadette Brady has also published an interesting paper on the relationship between two astrological bodies. I hope I'm pronouncing them right. Heileg and Alcasoden to predict death. But to be honest with you, I found it so complicated, I kind of gave up on it. So I've just mentioned a couple of houses. So let's take a look at which astrological house might hold the structure or themes for as our mortality plays out. And I'll come back to the 8th house at the end. So we'll start with the 4th house, beginnings and endings, ruled by the moon, the symbol of our instinct, the past, our soul. Our connection with home and belonging is triggered, particularly when transpersonal planets cross over the IC. I think it's an important seed moment that begins kind of like a new evolutionary cycle, and it makes us question our relationship with home, roots, family, belonging. And Liz Green has a really interesting work she does suggesting that the 4th house symbolizes the archetypal inheritance of our father, while the 10th symbolizes the archetypal inheritance of our mother. And of course, without Dad, we wouldn't be here. I think this is fascinating subject, but we can't go further into this, unfortunately, tonight because of time. So I always like to include the ninth house because it's about our belief, and it's originally known, obviously, as the house ruled by Jupiter, king of the gods, want to expand our understanding of the unknown. And faith and belief, for me, have a major part to play in our understanding or an experience of mortality. Now, I have Pluto in the ninth, so my entire life has been exploring and transforming what faith and belief mean to me. And the 12th house, okay, it's about the deep unconscious, the hidden, the collective, our ancestors, karma, the collective, and it's ruled again by good old Jupiter and Neptune more recently. And planets in the 12th house carry an archetypal energy of what we need to release in order to surrender and even dissolve into the unknown. For example, Pluto in the 12th house can provide a clue to the ancestral trauma or birth traumas we might be carrying and needs to be released for us to fully embrace our mortality. Venus in the 12th can, in my experience, suggest a deep love of God. Many of my clients believe that they've been nuns or monks in a previous life, or very strongly in this life are drawn to religious or spiritual life. Neptune in the 12th can indicate a loss of identity in the outside world, yet profoundly sensitive to the collective mind, or for some people, God or the universe, the universal consciousness. Now, I find it absolutely fascinating that Peter Sellers had Neptune in the 12th, and he only kind of found his identity through the characters he played. He apparently had no idea who he was. I also believe our 12th life house contains, and this is not the right word to use for a 12th house, Piscean 12th house, but it's our yearning for Hareth, our true home. So as I see it, the 12th house carries the kind of theme of the ending of our story that we've been living out during our earthly existence. But it's the 8th house, isn't it, that provides a deep focus on a relationship with mortality because it's ruled by Mars, the archetype of personal survival, and Pluto, Lord of the Underworld, the archetype of our collective survival. And you can't really reduce the experience of mortality further than that. Now, people with the planets in the 8th tend to have very intense experiences. Some are confronted with sexual issues around intimacy, commitment and betrayal. Some have issues with scandals. Some are drawn to work with death and dying and make excellent psychologists. And others are drawn to working with people's resources or money. Well, as they say, kind of death, sex and money make the world go round. And that's the 8th house for me. And it's possible, I don't know how you'll feel about this, it's possible that the sign on the cusp on the 8th house symbolizes your dying process. For example, if you have cancer on the 8th, you're more likely to die cared for at home, or perhaps in a care home. Aries, perhaps your death will be brought about by some kind of heroic deed. If you've got Pisces on the 8th, perhaps your life might dissolve away or you become more confused at the end of your life. Aquarius, perhaps an unusual death, such as wanting to blast your remains into heaven in a rocket. It's possible that planets in the 8th might also describe how you die. For example, I have Uranus in my 8th. So it could indicate that I'm going to have a sudden death. Very open to that. Mars might indicate a violent death, Venus a beautiful death, and so on. But all of this needs so much more research. So, yes, I'm going to move on to the transpersonal planets, because I think when we look at the archetypal theme of the transpersonal planets, I think they have a strong part to play in putting us back in right relationship with our mortality. Because, for instance, Saturn, wherever Saturn is, it reminds us about Father Time. It's known as the Grim Reaper. It's the teacher, it's our karma, it's our life lessons. And I look at Saturn as kind of the stern schoolmaster who has our best interests at heart. So we're always learning lessons through Saturn. Chiron, it reminds us of the vulnerability of the human condition, the bridge between the seen and the unseen world, which teaches about suffering and humility and healing and compassion. And Uranus, oh gosh, life is full of shocks and surprising beginnings and endings and sudden insights or meetings that can be utterly life-changing. And Neptune, life is full of releasing and dissolving and confusion and spiritual yearning and spiritual insights, but also this sort of sense of where is home. And Pluto, certainly not least, Pluto reminds us that life consists of cycles of death and rebirth. Our unconscious is constantly calling us to transform the lower self into the higher self, the dark into light. Let me just go back here. And again. Oh, hang on a sec. I've lost the going back. Here we go. So let's just have a look. Again, it's just a very brief look at the astrological cycles of life, which for me are here to remind us of our mortality through our aging process. It doesn't matter how much we deny our aging process, it's going to happen. However, rather than feeling we've clambered onto a conveyor belt that's kind of at birth, which is sort of unceremoniously going to chuck us off at some point, I see aging as an evolutionary process, a kind of never-ending spiral of existence. So let's start with Jupiter. Jupiter obviously is a 12-year cycle, and I look at this as testing our faith and belief as it continues to cycle around our chart. Without me, faith, it's kind of like for me that life is like living with a three-legged table, always about to topple over, but grow the fourth leg of faith, and we've got something really solid to lean on, especially when life throws us those curved balls that we're not expecting. Saturn return every 28 years or so, constantly presenting us with the challenges every 7 years through squares and oppositions to accept who we are and to grow and mature. And we all know that the Saturn return at the age of 28 it can be extremely challenging. And again, at around about 58, when we have our second Saturn return, it certainly was for me. So we also then have the midlife crisis of Uranus. Uranus makes its return when we're age 84, if we make it that long. The midlife crisis, which we talked about before, demands we pay attention to how we want to live our life as an older adult. And this is when the big questions arise, who the hell am I? What do I really want? How do I want to spend the rest of my life? And I'm sure many of you will have experienced this can cause havoc in your early 40s. But however, in my eyes, this is the stage of life when we enter our maturing adulthood and prepares us for our Chiron return at 50. When we get to 50, and this is what I think this is the gift of Chiron, we can no longer deny our aging process. And for women, this marks the time of the menopause. The average age of menopause is 53. So, and it's this time of great transition from younger woman into older woman, and hopefully wiser woman. And I don't want to miss the men out here as well, because I think it's also of the 50 is a real time of reflection for all of us. We are no longer a young person. So Neptune and Pluto cycles are different because we never experience a return. Rather, we experience their influences only in parts of our chart. For example, Neptune takes 165 years to complete its cycle. So for me, I was born with Neptune in the 11th. So I've only experienced Neptune's nebulous magic over my ascendant when I was 18. I had no idea who I was. And then it conjuncted my sun on 2003 when I was 50. Another hugely confusing time, which coincided with my Chiron return. And it's now sitting on my IC, which I am thoroughly enjoying. And not confused at all. And I actually see tonight's talk as a kind of expression of Neptune sitting on my IC, conjunct the North Node as well, opposite, and it's opposite my moon conjunct the MC. So yes, I thought this was very timely. And then let's look at Pluto's 246 years to complete its cycle. Natal Pluto was in my 9th house. It was crossed over my MC and my ascendant, but it won't make over my sun before I die. My Pluto experiences over the past 72 years have involved the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 1st and 2nd houses, and it's just entering my 3rd. Therefore, for me, transforming into an adult has involved a very intense personal journey rather than learning through relationships. And that's been my experience of mortality for me. So personally, I find these cosmic cycles really comforting, because for me, they put into context my journey of evolution this lifetime. And it's been enlightening when constructing a timeline to trace what's happened when these planets crossed my ascendant, my MC, and met up with my sun. You know, kind of who says that astrology is rubbish? So just to finish off, again, we're just scratching the surface of here. Obviously, planetary aspects provide clues about how we might experience our mortality. For example, charts with oppositions and squares indicate a more challenging journey through life. People with T-squares and grand crosses can feel very driven and obsessive during their experience of mortality. Yet all these aspects can present opportunities for gaining wisdom. And chart shapes, again, provide clues about how life manifests. For example, a bucket-shaped charts are about intensity and focus, indicating a life mission, perhaps expressed through the planet at the handle. And then seesaw charts are often kind of really black and white themes here. So life is about learning to compromise and negotiate. So, and a splash chart might indicate someone who may have a wide range of experiences. That's kind of me, a jack of all trades, perhaps, and so on. But the more we understand our chart, the more we can take ownership of our very personal experience of our mortality. And that's when we realize comparing our life with other people's life is useless. It's a useless exercise. People may have similar experiences, but they will never experience life the way we do. I'm going to go back a second. So, as Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that's what I think is the gift of mortality. Okay, there's so much more. I know I've been chucking stuff at you, but there's so much more to explore. And we haven't touched on so many things, but I'm not going to go into that now. But I want to finish with Felicity Warner, who I mentioned earlier. Now, Felicity has a deep respect for astrology, and as I said, has sat with hundreds of dying people. So over the years, she's noticed something really fascinating. She thinks that the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water, play a significant role as the dying process unfolds. And during our conversation, which you can hear on Astrology and the Dying Process on my YouTube channel, she explained how the elements step forward, which prompted me to think about whether the planets also play their part as we die. Just again, I'm just chucking this at you, see how you think. So Felicity said that the four elements show themselves in a set pattern. First, there's this sense of earth. She thinks the element of earth shows up first. There is this sense of slowing down, the energy field ebbing. And she says there's this sort of feeling of I can't be bothered, or people say I just can't be bothered anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And I think that's very Neptune, dissolving our physicality or our attachment to the physical. She then says that she thinks that the water element steps forward because there is a sense of the deep unconscious becoming more conscious. There is a sense of profound desire for healing and release. And she says often people will say things like, I want my mother, which is about, I think that's about home, mother, that sort of sense of mother home. So I feel that's very much Moon, Chiron stepping forward. And then she says they often go into this very active fire period, which is about burning off the dross. That's a very quick energy. They often have prophetic dreams. There can be anger involved. And I think that's very Mars, Uranus, quick energy. And then she says there is this sense of them shifting into the air element, shifting into becoming the breath. I don't know if any of you sat beside the dying, but that's right at the end, that it just goes down to the breath. And for me, it's like this coming back to the first breath, the last breath of life. And again, I think that's very Chiron. And Neptune, this sort of sense of absolutely letting go. And while we were talking about this, I had this really strange vision that perhaps Saturn waits beside the veil between the worlds. I don't, kind of like, he's been the stern, he's been this kind of stern headmaster, paying homage to our life journey as Mercury escorts us through. And perhaps Pluto acts as the consultant, making sure all goes well. I don't know. But I just love that. I just love that idea that I don't feel alone when I'm going to die. I just think they're all going to show up, and I think it's going to be a right old adventure. So I want to, what is happening here? I don't know why this is not happening. Hang on a second. No, it's going backwards. Why is that going backwards? Sorry, let me just see if I can find a way of going forwards. Here we go. So I want to finish with Felicity's chart. I think this is one of the most interesting charts I've seen about somebody really connecting with their mortality and sort of using their life so well. As you can see, she's worked with death and dying all her life. She's dedicated to helping people to understand their journey of mortality so that they can die as consciously as they can. And as you can see, her rising sign is Virgo, service, healing. And obviously the chart ruler is the psychopomp Mercury. just going to move you guys over here so I can get a better view of that. That's it. So Pluto is in Virgo in the 12th, and obviously that's a chart ruler. Mercury is involved, and it opposes her new moon in Pisces, which is trine Neptune in Scorpio in the 2nd, which I think is really locked into spiritual values, and Jupiter in Sagittarius in the 3rd. Well, it's her teaching. Mars and Mercury are in mutual reception. I just love this in her chart. Mars in Gemini in the 9th is conjunct to MC, which takes us back to the psychopomp chart ruler Mercury. There's always this dance going on. And Mercury's in Aries, and it wants to get out there and speak. And she does so many one-to-ones. It's so interesting that it's in the 7th house. Chiron is in Aquarius in the 6th house. Well, that's the house of service and work. And she's really gone out on a limb to do this work. She's really ruffled feathers doing this work that she does. And she's got a very strong Saturn, karma, death in Capricorn, the old soul in the 4th house, the house of beginnings and endings, and that's trine her Pluto in the 12th, which takes us back to her to the psychopomp Mercury. And then we've got the North Node Libra, which is ruled by Venus, and the South Node Aries is in the 7th, which is the ruler of Mars, ruled by Mars, deposited again by the psychopomp chart ruler Mercury. So I have a funny feeling that she came through to do this work because she knew how to do it. She's done this before. So that's Felicity's chart. It'll be very interesting at the end to see if any of you have got other comments about that. But I just think it's such a beautiful example of somebody living the life that they're meant to live. So I want to really end with, and I'm calling this Out of the Mouths of Babes. And this is 7-year-old Julie. It's not her real name. Her mum is a great friend, and she's really concerned. She's very fascinated by astrology. This is her mum. And she wants to find ways to support her very Pisces-orientated daughters penetrating insights into life and death, bearing that she is 7. So this is a few examples of what Julie's been saying. So, Mummy, she has a sister. My sister and I chose you. We were in the spirit world, and I said I would go down first. Mummy, death doesn't really exist, does it? We're just here to experience life. 6? She said that when she was 6. Okay. And then she says to her teacher, well, I believe there is a force, but I don't believe it's in human form. And then she says to her mum, she's talking about her great-grandparents who she's never met, so these are her mum's grandparents who she obviously knew. So Julie says, I can see great-grandparents. She knew they were she knew they were the great-grandparents outside the window at the moment. And they say there's only one thing that matters in life, and not to forget that, and it's love. So it makes you think, doesn't it? Yeah, and to conclude, I just love how 5 rainbows appeared over London at the moment of the Queen's death was announced. Another beautifully synchronistic example of great mystery at work and very 12th house, because they appeared and then they disappeared. So I hope this talk has made you think about how astrology can put us back, or begin to put us back in right relationship with our mortality. And I hope it will inspire you to think about your own mortality, that's the object, and how your astrological chart holds the shape and structure for it as your life continues to unfold. And this is another great favorite saying of mine, which is just to leave you with, we're all visitors to this time, this place. We're just passing through. Our purpose here is to learn, to grow, to love, and then we return home.
I'd just like to take this opportunity before we start our Q&A to say thank you. That was a wonderful talk. I find it very moving, very interesting, and really appreciate your coming along to share your insights with us this evening. I have put a note for those of you who want to follow this up to Sue's online YouTube channel and her website, and I'll probably pop that in again towards the end of the evening. But before we move on to Q&A, thank you very much indeed, Sue. So I think we were all spellbound as the evening progressed because there were very few comments on the chat. So I'd like to invite anyone who does have a comment or a question to, perhaps if you use the indicators, you can put your hand up and we'll get an idea then how many we've got. And then please feel free to unmute, or if there are a number of you, I'll call on you. Pearl, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Pearl, you need to unmute first.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't want to get too morbid. This is really fascinating. Thank you very much for this. And I recollect being with my mother when she passed, you know, those days before, and I didn't have all of this information, but she was ready. She was done. I just want to ask the question, has anyone looked at or investigated the charts of people who really did live through death experiences, Holocaust survivors? It seems like a lot of them did have these feelings of going through death and then coming back and having another chance at life. And I always wondered if there's something really in common with people who go through a mass elimination. I don't know how else to put it.
It's a great question, and I haven't researched this. I don't know if anybody has. Yeah. I think, you know, this whole concept of astrology and mortality is in its infancy. So it'll be very interesting to see if people do take that up or does a research project on.
Because there does seem to be an absolute privilege in being able to look at your own mortality and have the support systems. And I know most likely in other cultures, they always had someone in the tribe that would guide them through the end. Just a question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Pearl. Just checked the Q&A, but there are lots of thank yous and no questions that I can see. Is there anybody else who'd like to share any? Oh, Elizabeth, please do feel free to unmute.
Thank you. Sorry. Hi. So I'm wondering if you know of anyone who has done research or looked at charts with regard to transplant recipients.
Great question. No, is the answer to that. I haven't. No, and I don't. And I don't know if anybody else here on the call does know anything about this, but I think all of this new, these new ways of extending life is going to be a very interesting thing for astrologers to study. You know, it opens up so much to look at and discuss. And yeah, it's, I mean, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here about extending life, but I'm very interested in that as well, how that plays out in the chart.
I'd be willing to contact you. I'm 20 years post-transplant, so.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Bilateral transplant, so.
Okay, please do.
Fascinating.
Actually, that would be very, I'd like to talk to you about that. That would be interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Margaret, I think you're applauding rather than.
Sorry, what was that?
I thought that you had your hand up, but
I
in
was
fact, I
trying
think
to
you were.
find out where the hand was. I can't find it.
Would
So
you
that
like?
was mine. I just wanted to say to Sue, that was absolutely fascinating. You had me on the edge of my seat, and every one of your pages was so full of interest. It's like you've kind of opened Pandora's box. It wasn't Pandora, of course. It really, so many ideas are there to be followed up. So thank you ever so much.
Well, it's just lovely to see you as well, Margaret. Been too long.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Julia's here.
Julia, yeah. Julia, would you like to unmute? You have your hand raised.
Hello. Thank you for such a wonderful talk. I noticed that you had something about the chart for the assisted dying bill.
Oh, I did.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
It's so interesting. Oh my God, I shouldn't have shown you that. I was just going to use it in case I had more time. How can I share that with you? We won't do that now because we won't have time to go into it, but I have run it up and I'm absolutely sure that it's going to go through and it's going to turn everything on its head. It's a fascinating chart. And I did it with against the UK chart. Yeah.
Could you give me the data? Would you be willing to do
Yes,
that?
100%. I'll pop it into the chat. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Lisa. Can you hear me?
Lisa?
Hi.
Hello, Lisa. Please do go ahead.
I do have a question. It's just occurred to me. I've heard a lot lately about people who have dementia and that they're already kind of in the process of leaving. And I'm wondering if there's been anything done or written about that, or you've seen any pattern for that.
I just think this is, oh gosh, this is such an interesting area, isn't it? Oh gosh, I'm going to say something so utterly contentious. So I think that confusion at the end of the light. I mean, even when I was born, people were dying in their 60s and 70s. Very few, particularly men, were making it through to their 80s. And this has changed hugely, obviously, because of medical science. And I'm very curious about how confusion, especially in older people, step up at the end of life, but they're not physically dying.
Right.
So I don't know. Talking to Felicity was absolutely changed so much for me about the dying process, and Neptune appearing to play such an important role in the dying process. And again, this was just a conversation. And in fact, I'm having another conversation with her in a couple of weeks' time where we're going to go into this a little bit more, because she uses sacred oils also at the end of life. And I'm just so curious about how extending life, how this plays out in the chart. And again, there's so much research to be done. And it's a very delicate area to walk into as well. I think we have to be deeply respectful of what's okay for people and what isn't okay for people around this.
Yeah, thank you.
Sue was going to put that date in the chat.
Yeah, I am. Yes.
We'll give you a moment to do that.
Hang on a sec. I've got to work out how to do this. Give me a sec. Oh, no, I tell you what. I'm going to have to I'm going to have to send it to Gillian because I haven't got it on the slides.
Okay, if you've got the information available, I could type it in as you speak.
Hang on, let me just see if I can find it.
So what we're talking about is the information for the assisted dying bill, and presumably you've chosen a specific date. Was it the introduction of the bill, or
it was the day? It was the minute it got passed. So my friend is the MP, and she was there in the chamber as it got passed. So it's the 29th of November 2024, and it was at 2:08 London time.
Bear with me.
Okay.
Hang on a minute. I probably ought to put that to the 24-hour clock, shouldn't I? So 14:02.
14:02.
So 29th of November 2024, 14:08
London.
And the place is obviously London.
Yeah. And it's absolutely accurate because that's what she sent me, and she was there.
Thank you. So there we are. That's gone in there.
UK
for anyone who wants to have a look at that. And you say that you looked at that chart with the UK chart. Did you use the 1801 standard? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Wow. I was very interested personally when you spoke about the elements at the end of life. I mean, I am no expert on this, but I am aware that within the Buddhist tradition, possibly Hindu, I mean, they're deeply interrelated, aren't they? They speak about the different elements leaving the body at different times.
Yes.
But I would have to go back to the books I've read too long ago to find out about the details. But yes, interesting.
Well, I'd never thought of the dying process. I know there was process to the dying. Obviously, I've sat with quite a few of people who've died, actually at the moment of their death. And I hadn't thought of it in the terms of the elements. And then this vision I had of Saturn just standing beside the cart going, well done, off you go. And Pluto just going, yeah, that's cool. And it's sort of, when I was talking to her, just any residential fear just went, God, it's going to be really busy. We're going to be accompanied.
I can see Saturn at the end there. Absolutely, because he's the boundary one. And
yes,
you cross the bar, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. He is the boundary. He's also our teacher, isn't he? So it's I just feel like that his energy is going to be present. God, I hope so. I can't wait to sadly can't come back and tell you all, but
and is a great manifesting to cross over.
But I had this vision of Pluto sort of like being, there's always a consultant doctor who's lords over everybody else. And I had this sort of vision of Pluto just standing there, sort of, with a white stethoscope going, yes, well, very, very good, off you go. That kind of vibe.
If I might get a bit personal, I noticed you told your story of being in an aircraft crash, and you also mentioned that Uranus is in your 8th house. And Uranus, of course, is huge shocks and sudden changes, and also spiritual awakening, or awakening onto your true path, as it were. So I find that quite fascinating, because I hope you weren't, but I imagine that you were quite badly hurt.
No, that was the weird thing about it. Neither the pilot or I, the whole plane was a write-off. The whole thing was so weird how it happened. Oh my God. But anyway, the plane, complete wreck, right off. And he and I walked out, both of us.
Wow.
I mean, it changed my life.
Yes.
I wasn't, I wasn't physically hurt, but I was absolutely, blasted, all my centers were blasted open. And actually the words that came to me while I was sitting beside the plane crash was, "Your life is a sham." That's what the words, and they literally just dropped into my forehead. And it was like, oh my God, I've just so cocked up. And I just knew that I had to do something about it. Otherwise I might as, that's it. There's no point being here.
Well, if only Nigel Farage had the similar experience, but I think he reacted rather differently.
Well, I think we all react how we react, don't we?
He had Uranus rising, and he had a terrible fear of being in aeroplanes. And he was in a light aircraft, and it crashed.
Yeah.
But for him, it was business as usual.
He's just different, he's
a different soul with a different purpose.
He's having his experience of mortality. We'll put it that way. Yes. I think the big thing is that when you really get that you're here to do your life, it is this: don't bother trying to compare yourself. The grass is never going to be greener, because you've got to do your life, however difficult and challenging that is. But if you meet those challenges and then you meet yourself, then actually I think you can actually live a very fulfilled life, even if it's just living a very low level life. You don't have to be on the, not everyone is destined for, I don't know, the stage at Glastonbury, the pyramid stage at Glastonbury. We're not. Most of us are worker bees.
We're all destined for death.
We're certainly destined for death, that is for sure. Yes, we are destined for that. Whatever death means to us, I think that's really, for me, it doesn't mean death. It means me, Sue Brayne, physical body's going to die. But it doesn't, I believe there is, a consciousness will continue. That's a very Buddhist belief. A stream of consciousness continues and incarnates when the time is right, in another entity or another expression of me, maybe, I don't know. But me, this person, me sitting here, I will be done. And I'm really happy with that.
It's really logical that the energy has to go somewhere. And maybe that's what Pluto's about, the kind of strength of the energy that has to go somewhere.
Well, it's transformation, isn't it? It's constantly transforming. And yes, it's a sort of sense. I mean, some people have very, very dramatic lives, and some people don't. Some people, their mortality is maybe if they've got a lot of, I don't know, yes, a lot of, I'm thinking about somebody I know really well. She's got a great big trine in fire, and she has no fire. She's got a trine in fire, but she never uses it. It's really interesting. And she lives a very unfiery life. I find her chart fascinating, or how she is interpreting that or living it out. Yeah, Jane Tarlow wants to ask something. Jane, do you want to unmute?
Yes, I might sort of try and be present. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me? No. I'm not quite sure what I've done here. Sorry, let me just check. Anyway, that was really fascinating. I'm really pleased. It's the first one of Aquarius 7 I've even been to. Yes. Sorry, is my video on? I don't quite know what I'm doing here.
Yes, we can see you and hear you.
I can't see. I was just going to say, I was thinking I've looked a little bit at very particular situations, where somebody I know has, passed away or died. I've noticed transits of Neptune seem to be quite powerful. And particularly in a case where there's a Pisces 6th house this person had, and the transit of Neptune was opposing Jupiter in the 12th house, and that just seemed incredibly powerful. And at the same time, the transit of Neptune was conjuncting the North Node as well. And I'm prompted really to look for Neptune and Chiron in particular she also had a transit of the North Node to Chiron in the 6th house. So I'm thinking, if there's a lot going on in the 6th house and the 12th house, this poor woman also had like a Jupiter conjunct Uranus in the 12th as well. And it's all 6th and 12th house stuff going on. And as I say, the transit of Neptune opposing Jupiter, which looked like dissolving of life or something, thinking of Jupiter as being like life and Neptune as kind of dissolving. Anyway, I just thought I'd bring it in.
It's interesting. Some people their lives just dissolve away. It's very Neptunian, isn't it? Or very 12th house. I'm interested in that. I'm interested.
Yeah, I just thought, because it's so difficult, isn't it, to
and other people fight it. They don't want to. They're very angry at the end of life. So I'm really interested in Stephen Forrest talking about, if we don't make the transition to the North Node, if we don't embrace our evolution, this is according to esoteric astrology, by the way, then it does affect us, our death, our aging process and our death. And I found it very interesting when we were doing the study into end of life, that people who are having difficult deaths or in denial or was fighting it, they often had they were sitting on trauma that hadn't been released, or they were carrying the guilt and shame of a major secret. And of course, nowadays, the medicine has elbowed away the priests at the bedside, so people are not talking or releasing themselves like they automatically did in the old days. You'd always have a priest at the bedside saying, what do you want to say? So you could release the burden of the soul. But we don't have that anymore. And I interviewed a lovely nurse. She was a palliative care nurse. And she said, it's ridiculous. We, the palliative care nurses, which are here clinical carers, we've become the priests at the bedside. We're the ones, no training to listen to this or catch it or see, catch the language. Does this person want to say something that's really profound, which will help them to let go? And this is why I do love the idea of the death doulas and the spiritual midwives.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Thank you. You've been incredibly generous with your time, Sue. You were here early to set up. So I think at this point, I'd like formally to bring the Q&A to a close, to say thank you to all of you who've asked questions. Thank you especially to Sue for being so generous with your time and giving us this wonderful, wonderful talk. I'll give you an opportunity to slip away and have a break. But before we do move into the more informal time, I just thank you very much indeed. Really, I've to say I've enjoyed it is true, even if it's such a deep subject. I found it really helpful and thoughtful and interesting. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, indeed. So at this point, we'll move into our more free-flowing chat. People may wish to continue on the subject, or we might wish to go back to. So if anyone tuned in late, early on, we spoke about a new in-person group that has started up. We'll put the information in there if people who were late. And there was a very interesting discussion about Mercury and when exactly Mercury is Cazimi. And I suspect that depends upon exactly how you define Cazimi. And Bernard was speaking about, well, it has to be right in latitude as well as longitude. Fascinating stuff. And of course, we've had quite a lot going on astrologically in terms of planets moving forwards again. The floor is yours, ladies and gentlemen. Who's going to start?
Just an observation on the talk. it occurs to me how little experience any of us have of death now that we live in huge communities. If you lived in a small village, you'd have a lot more experience of it, and maybe it'd be less frightening or less of a thing. Just a thought.
Yes, and with life expectancy being so much longer as well, and children, of course, that's the thing that really, really has changed in most cultures now.
That's true.
You don't get half of children dying, as you did in my study period, say in the 1600s. It was about 40% chance of becoming an adult or whatever. And again, that's something we find incomprehensible now in Western Europe anyway.
People's experience of death has changed quite radically, really, isn't it? I hadn't thought of that.
We presumably tend to die in hospitals or care homes or hospices if we're lucky, whereas presumably more people have died at home.
I believe so. I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's removed from the family members, isn't it, to a much greater extent?
Can I just say something about that? Yes, it's absolutely right. It really it was the penicillin that changed our relationship with death and dying, because before that we did die at home. There was no NHS and there are very few hospitals. But of course, the wars started the hospital movement, and the Second World War certainly did. But it was the penicillin taking away pain. That's when we took the dying into hospital. So that was really around the Second World War, just after the Second World War. And then, of course, the NHS was born in 1958. 1948. And that's when everything majorly changed, yeah. But before that, we were cared for at home. And we died a lot earlier. We did.
Has anybody put together, it sounds awful saying it like this, but a list of people you know who've died with the dates and everything to actually look at the charts? I suppose there probably is. I've just never thought to research it, and I do feel quite interested to do that. Is that something anybody would be interested to do? Do you have a lot of charts, Sue?
I think the person to talk to is Alison, because Alison Bolton, I don't know if she's gone. I think she might have gone, but she's done a very interesting article about Mercury, the psychopomp, acting as the as the guide.
Yeah.
She found 3 deaths. They were very accurate deaths. I think the Queen might have been one of them. I'm not sure, because we know when she's died. But the thing is, we don't know what time people have died. It's not like birth.
Well, that's why I was thinking of people we knew who've died.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But can you? Yeah, I think it'd be very interesting to have a research project.
One might well know that actually to look at actual charts at the moment.
But read Alison's, because she's one of the first people to really look at the concept of
I have made a note.
Yeah. Okay.
When my friend was dying, she saw her father come and get her, and she said, "No, I don't want to go now." Right, I'm not going. But she did go. But when I looked at her son's chart, he had Jupiter exactly on his moon in Capricorn.
Peter and I taught them when you get these deathbed visions, we used to call them the takeaways. They'd come to take you away.
I have noticed that you can see the sort of thing, you can see someone's going to die in their family's charts.
Yeah.
Because they're facing loss. Whereas when I've looked for deaths of, like with my mother, my father, there seem to be lots of windows of opportunity to go.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell which one they were. And yet the loss to the children, us, was much more noticeable.
I think we've all got portals that we could leave and we don't for whatever reason. I do believe that. And don't forget that people's lives are being extended through medicine.
Yeah.
So a lot of us would have died already.
Yes.
I think it's really important to remember that.
I have a question.
I remember when Chris Mitchell gave us a talk about horary astrology, and of course with horary astrology and medieval astrology, things were very cut and dried, and you could do something about the likely lifespan of someone from the birth chart. And he said that according to his birth chart, he would have died young, but medical intervention prevented that. Can I, before everybody disappears, can I just pop something in? I'm popping something in the chat about our next talk, which is going to be on the forthcoming conjunction of Chiron with Eris, healing crisis or cathartic release, and that's with Tamsin St. George. So do feel free to join us Thursday, 6th of March. Next time around. Okay, back to the general discussion.
Sue, that was just so interesting. You suggested there were a few portals when somebody might die, because I have a friend who's an astrologer, and she sort of worked out 3 possible dates when she might die.
Well, all you got to do is work it out and see which one happens. People can say this is going to happen and that's going to happen, but who knows? I mean, I think that's why it's so difficult to foretell death. And it's such a huge moral dilemma, isn't it? I would never tell somebody, even if I saw it in their chart, or I thought I saw it, I'd never say that.
Never say.
I thought somebody else was going to die, ever. And I've had lots of clients where that possibility, the potential has been there. So I'm very careful what I say. Very.
Have you found that people pass when those living let them go?
Oh, God, yes. Absolutely. That's just essential. But, we're so scared of it, we want to hang on. And, this whole, the dying process is about detachment. It's about, and that's where the Buddhist teachings come in. I just think they're so helpful.
And just medically, my father passed in the hospital and the doctor said you need to let him go, and that my mother made peace with it, and that night he passed. So I believe it. And also when she was passing, she saw my father in bed next to her, and she was certain he was there. So it was quite profound for me. It was very profound. So thank you for this.
Oh, it's lovely. And we need to normalize these end of life experiences.
I'm going to change the subject a little bit. Someone, so it's not too morbid. Someone mentioned that because of medical science, we can't really take precise advantage of the portals that are there. Medical science prolongs life. There is something similar going on with pregnancies. You used to be able to more or less predict when someone would get pregnant. Nowadays, since there are contraceptives out there, I say you can't predict a thing. Women have it entirely in their hands to decide when or whether they're going to get pregnant. It's forget the astrology. It doesn't work anymore.
Well, that's really interesting you should say. So I've just the Nicola Smuts, what's her surname? Anyway, she's the fertility. Yeah.
South Africa.
Yes, fertility.
She wrote a book. And it's brilliant.
Yeah, she's fantastic. I've just interviewed her on my site, and she works with the doctor with the cycle, and she's having phenomenal success in helping particularly women who've given up hope to get pregnant.
Yeah. She wrote a book. It's excellent.
She's she's really, really wonderful woman.
I think Chris Brennan interviewed her, and that's how I learned about her and then picked up the book. Yeah.
But the other big thing, I mean, this is, oh God, it goes on forever, doesn't it? But there's all the surrogacy now, and how does that affect somebody's chart? And I'm fascinated.
What? Surrogacy?
People having
surrogacy.
Surrogacy.
Oh God, I haven't even thought about that.
Yeah, and also people having test tube babies, how that affects
In vitro.
Yeah. And my nephew is one of the first 100, so I'm really interested in that. He's now got children of his own. They're all about 40. So Louise Brown, she's about 42, 45.
Right.
But so Ollie's 40, but he's now had his own children. But I haven't actually looked at his chart to, you've got to be so careful, not to tread on delicate ground. I think he knows his test tube, but
yeah, I know what you mean.
The moment of the test tube, the moment of the implantation, or is it the moment that the egg is mixed?
The moment of fertilization, and yeah.
So it's a fascinating subject.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Very much. Well, at least I got us off the morbid subject.
I don't find death talk. I find it joyous. I don't find it morbid, but that's me.
Billy Connolly talks about it being the next great adventure.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
The last. Not the next, but the last.
The next great adventure. It's not the last, it's just the next. Yeah. So that's my take on it, by the way. Other people might not agree with that. No, that's fine.
Pre-war astrologers.
Sorry?
Pre-war astrologers used to do quite a lot of work on the things we've been talking about how trying to find planetary patterns for when people died and planetary patterns for when people would give birth and so on. So if anybody still reads Carter's books, particularly Symbolic Directions in Modern Astrology, which he wrote in the 1930s, you'll find most of the stuff in there. As far as death is concerned, he thinks that very few deaths take place without Jupiter or Neptune being present.
Definitely Neptune. I'm not sure about Jupiter, but I do believe in Neptune. Really interesting. In what way does Jupiter show up?
In the same way. It might be the ruler of the eighth and then be on an angle at the moment of death.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But you also have to take into account the fact that he's a theosophist. So, that's going to predispose him towards a certain worldview, towards a certain philosophy, and towards using certain planets. But, astrology changes over the years, and it's worth having a look at him. And the same thing about conception and birth. Of course, people used to spend a lot of time looking for what was called the prenatal epoch, which goes all the way back to Greek days, where the idea that the moon and the horizon at birth are the inverse of what they were at conception. But trying to prove it, that's a different game altogether. But, if you dig out these old books, people have been working on it before. But as you say, these days, people, they don't seem to play with horoscopes in quite the same way. Perhaps these aren't the burning questions that excite the current generation,
Yeah. Stephen Forrest mentions Jupiter being implicated in death. Of course, he would have followed E.O. Carter, I imagine. I think it was one of his sources, but he was one of his sources. But he speaks about the process of liberation and Jupiter as a liberator, as a freer, and how we expand from our contracted nature. I don't think he put it quite like this, but our current nature is contracted and there is an expansion into something bigger, hence the Jupiterian link.
Yeah.
That's how I saw Jupiter on my friend's son's chart, exactly on his moon. I saw that my friend in dying was going on a long distance journey and was expanded.
Wow.
I wonder as well whether Jupiter being involved would be the meeting with God, or your
Absolutely. Could be, couldn't it? Or that expansion into God.
Yeah.
Fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I love the fact, are you saying that Jupiter was conjunct the moon? And of course,
His moon, yes, his mother.
moon.
And he was so close to his mother. And he'd taken care of her. And when she died, Jupiter was exactly on his moon.
on her. Oh, I see. Transiting Jupiter was on his moon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just reminded when we were talking about Simon Foreman, the Elizabethan Jacobean astrologer who supposedly predicted his own death. And I found the quote about it. It was a Sunday afternoon in September. He told his wife that he would die the following Thursday night. Monday came, all was well. Tuesday came, he not sick. Wednesday came, and still he was well. By which his impertinent wife did much twit him in his teeth. Thursday came, and dinner was ended. He was very well. He went down to the waterside and took a pair of oars to go to some buildings he was in hand with in Puddle Dock. Being in the middle of the Thames, he presently fell down, only saying, an impost, it's a tax, and so died, a most sad storm of wind immediately following. It's a great story, but it does come from William Lilly, who maybe has a benefit in repeating it. But it did strike me, if one was so that much in tune with your astrological chart, then you might see that sort of, we talked about the window of opportunity, and say, oh yeah, yes, I'm going to let me go with this. But it's a good anecdote anyway.
Davison was the same. The lodge president from the 1960s through to the middle 70s, he gave a talk at the lodge in the middle 80s on his official retirement from all lodge business. Went home and died, but it was an unusual talk because, in fact, he presented a horary which he had drawn in the 1930s and interpreted it as a picture of his own life. And how everything had happened after that up until this date, which is very odd and very personal because he would never normally do such things. And he went home and put himself to bed and folded his clothes and said goodnight to his wife and had a scotch, which was apparently unusual, went to bed and died. And everybody thought that he'd definitely known that was coming.
Well, I've heard loads of stories like that. I mean, obviously not the same as the one you're telling, but people just, suddenly out of the blue, out of character, wanting to go and sort of make up with people, or they've gone off and bought the family presents that they would do, and then bingo, they've sorted out financial stuff with their wife, all of that kind of stuff, made the wills. They're fit and healthy. Boom, they're gone. My friend's husband, he did all of that, and she was thinking, this is a bit odd, but fair enough. Nothing wrong with him. And then the next week, he drowned.
Oh,
gone. Yeah. So I think we know. I'm absolutely convinced we somehow know when we're going to die. We know when time is running out. Unconsciously, it's just like the clock is. I've got to do this. I don't know why, but I must. It's got that urgency. And I think the progressed chart might give clues about this.
Yep.
So the soul's recognition.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a no.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
There is
ready to go. Yeah.
There is a thought that clairvoyant people can see round the space of a person that their aura is kind of done something different. That it's possible to see who's going to die.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we all can actually.
It makes sense.
We're not open to it, are we? We don't respect those skills that we all innately have.
Yeah, and that the body knows.
Yeah.
That there is an amount of life that we have. And maybe when people are actually kept alive longer, that maybe there is something happening for them on another level as well. Because you can't, they say you can't cheat death.
Do you know something, Margaret? You said something just really sparked something there for me. And maybe the soul knows the amount of lived experience that we can have, but with with all this life extending stuff going on, that we don't have that lived. The life contracts, and if we're not cheating, I don't think cheating death is the right word, but if we're living beyond the sell-by date or the clock running out, we don't fully engage with life again because we can't. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, doesn't it?
It's a lived experience that matters.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Because I think in the East, it's the amount of chi you've got. You can make it last longer by living a quiet life, or you can use it up quickly and die sooner.
Yeah.
But there is an amount. So if your life is going to be extended one way or another, maybe, as you say, you'd have to thin it out, wouldn't you? And use less of it to make it last longer.
I guess so.
It's all speculation.
By the way, symbolic directions in modern astrology is available as a free PDF.
Oh, is it? Good.
Can you just repeat that?
Yes, symbolic directions in modern astrology.
Yeah.
If you just look it up, it's available as a free PDF.
Okay. Thank you.
And I would also recommend that people read Philip Larkin's poem, O Bard, which is about his very great fear of death. And it's a very profound and moving poem.
Yeah. Well, it's the one thing we're all going to have to face, so we need to wrestle with it. And I think, if we can live till we die, then we've done damn well.
Well said.
You have to be alive when death comes calling, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I think some of the profound writing that there's been on the subject speaks of if we live in the light of our inevitable demise, we take life itself to be more precious and make the most of it. And a brush with death, whether it's our own or a close family member, a close friend, can really shift one's perspective on this.
Absolutely.
We are not promised tomorrow. So what are we going to do with that Mary Oliver quote, what will you do with your one wild and precious life?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think this is the problem, that we've forgotten that life is this precious life, this one precious life. I mean, who knows about past lives? I mean, it's irrelevant because this is the life we're living now. This is the one that really bloody matters in the moment, not about what we've done in the past or where we're going in the future. It's how we work with ourselves this lifetime.
Yes.
With, all the stuff that we bring in with us, or however we do that.
Thank you. And thank you. And thank you, Maya, for popping in that link to the PDF. Very helpful of you. So I'm going to begin to pull this to a close now. You've been incredibly generous with your time, Sue. So before we all do disappear, it's possible, if you don't have the chat open, to open a chat window and you can copy and then paste into a document of your own what Maya has just popped in about the PDF for symbolic directions in modern astrology. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
And Sue, thank you so much for staying on. It's interesting when a subject really grabs people, we're sometimes reluctant to let it go and to move on to other things. And I think that the quality of discussion afterwards just says how important this topic is. So thank you all. Thank you for coming tonight. We look forward to seeing as many of you as possible at our next meeting, which, as I said, will be on the forthcoming Chiron Eris conjunction. And we have a full programme up to and including August. Delightful to see you all.
We could take the end of this meeting as a kind of practice death.
Yeah. Okay.
No, not really. No.
And now I feel rather strange about ending the meeting. But
we'll just call it a death cafe, an astrological death cafe. That'll do.
Thank you. Okay. Good night, everybody, and thank you all for staying. And thank you so much, Sue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.